I don't mean, remembering your clients' birthdays, but really being a trusted advisor. And that is such a strong skill in our industry and across other professional services. And that's what we have to remember. That is the core of our unique offering. And if we're pushing out AI generated work without interrogating it, we're devaluing our firms so incredibly. And that's where I think we need a lot of conversation, which you have to make room for that conversation. And, it's not just posting your AI vision or manifesto or whatever it is, but it's repetition, it's inviting questions, it's inviting discussion.
Hello and welcome to Building Brand Gravity. I'm Anne Green.
And I'm Steve Halsey.
And Steve, we have a featured guest today who is well known across U.S. integrated marketing comms and PR agencies, and that's Kim Sample, president of the PR Council. And I would definitely call her a friend of the pod, no doubt about it. And in our conversation, we dig deep into this moment of transformation for our sector. We're going to touch on a host of issues that both agency and client leaders alike, I think they shouldn't miss this, really relevant to their business. But before we jump into our chat, I thought we should talk about a recent event that GNS hosted, which had a lot of us buzzing.
Yeah, that's right, Anne. As you know, because you were one of our hosts here, we hosted the very first AI summit for the America regions of PROI worldwide, which is a global independent agency network that we're a part of. So we did a session where we had agency leaders, AI enablement leaders from firms, North and South America, as well as a few of our friends from Europe came over as well. And really the goal of the session was to move beyond the basics and just share how we're each driving AI transformation in our firms and with our clients. And by all accounts, this was really a high impact 2 days.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I came into the office this week and I missed seeing everybody. It was so lively and it was such a great group. So a big shout out to our planning committee for any of you, who are listening. And Steve, you are part of that. But we covered a ton of ground. So synthetic personas, agentic workflows, and agentic coworkers. The next phases of GEO. How do we get beyond GEO 101 and where is that going? Opportunities and barriers around adoption, ethical implications that we're all watching. We had a really lively session on AI, basically F-ups and flubs to reflect on some of the ways it's not going well out there in the world. But I think one of the other big exciting moments was a lot of show and tell from our colleagues during demo sessions. So we got to tap into the kinds of tools and platforms we've all been building. But I thought for our podcast listeners, Steve, I know you had fielded a survey and Rebecca Binder had helped with that before the event across the PROI Americas region. And right at the start of the summit, you summarized some interesting findings that I'd love you to share some of your observations and key takeaways, because we know people are tracking this topic very closely.
I'd be glad to. And it was interesting for me at the session. It reminded me of a discussion 18 months ago. We were in Miami with other PROI members, and we were talking about AI adoption and integration. And I asked everybody to raise their hand. I said, who here is even experimenting with AI? And it was maybe a third of the group raise their hand. Good thing was for our AI summit, when I asked that same question, everybody in the room raised their hand. But as you said, we did do a survey at the beginning, and I thought the findings were interesting because they reflected not just where our fellow PROI members were, but it really reflects a lot of what I'm hearing in the marketplace. And it was really three key things. I mean, first, AI adoption is real, but it's very uneven. And that was something we heard across a lot of our participants. While most agencies are actively using things like Copilot, chat, even creating custom GP environments, very few say that they're fully operationalizing AI across all their workflows. So there's a pretty big gap between where they're in kind of what I'm calling this muddy middle and kind of true integration. Secondly, I guess it shouldn't be surprising, but the biggest barrier, Ann, isn't the tech itself. It's that change management, the human element, things like training, governance, getting teams more comfortable embedding AI in what they're doing every day from a workflow standpoint. That really seems to be more of a challenge than the tools themselves. And third, and this is where we're seeing the real shift happening, the conversation really focus on how agencies are thinking about value. And third, there's a real shift happening in how agencies are really thinking about value. We're really starting from the agency standpoint and the PR council. I just had this conversation with a different meeting with Kim last week, are really talking about how do we move from the old ways of hours and outputs to really thinking about new ways of value creation, insight, acceleration, impact, things that really allow us to move beyond just pricing to really what are the talent models and what deep expertise do you bring? And ultimately, how are you moving that client's business forward? So I thought there was a lot to unpack over those 2 days. And, we had really rich conversations out there. And as you said, it was everything from synthetic research, there was GEO, discoverability, new commercial models. We even just saw some examples for demonstration purposes that shows what happened if you take AI too far. It allowed us to really step back and have a conversation about the importance of ethics, which I know is a topic that is big to you. But it's also, that conversation was just about reshaping the operating system of agencies as well as clients themselves. And to your earlier point, Anne, I think what made it so energizing was a level of openness. Everybody was willing to share their wins, what was not working, as you said, the occasional F ups that are out there. But but that's the important part about being in such a big moment of transformation is to have those conversations, to share those lessons so that we're all moving forward, co-creating what comes next in real time.
Yeah, the conversations were so impressive, and I'm really proud of all of our firms of how fast we're moving, but how intentionally we're moving too. But Steve, you just talked about that big moment of transformation. So that is the perfect segue, given my conversation with Kim Sample of the PR Council was also a lot about transformation and also how to understand where the agency landscape sits today and implications not just for agency leadership, but also client partners because that's such a symbiotic relationship. There are so many interesting trends and forces to talk about, and Kim and I cover a lot of them. As always, as people listen to these conversations, we welcome your feedback and questions. So reach out and be part of that conversation. So now, with no further ado, let's welcome Kim to the podcast. I'm so glad to welcome you back to the show, Kim Sample, president of the PR Council, and just someone with tremendous experience over the course of your career in our industry. For those that don't know, check it out. But Kim has been very senior at agencies for many years and has been now leading the PR Council for a number of years as well. So welcome, Kim.
Thank you. It's so good to be back. I think you're calling me old.
Well, if I'm calling you old, I'm calling myself that too. And that's where all the gray hair comes from. So it's all fine. It's all good. And, wisdom has its benefits, right?
Yes.
Well, I wanted to have you back to the podcast to talk a little bit about just where we see the industry right now. We like to have a mix of different types of conversations with different experts. And as an agency leader in the integrated marketing communications and PR space, I spent a lot of time looking at where we are, where we're going, and it just felt like a great time to check in with you again, given all the conversations you're having and the way you're watching the industry. So, I guess I'd start off to say you and I, over our recent decades in this business, have seen significant change in our industry. And there's been huge seismic moments of change. You and I could name a number of them: writing to the web, social media, et cetera, et cetera. And also the integration of different types of disciplines and firms. We are much different as PR firms now than we were, in the early 90s or before. But this moment feels different to me. It feels bigger and faster and more fundamental and profound. So I'd love to know, as someone whose job it is to look across our entire industry, not just the agency side, but also understand what clients are doing and thinking. What are you seeing, and how do you describe this moment in time?
Yeah, I think it's a massive period of change and transformation. And I think that's very difficult in our agency business because I don't know, your currency is how busy you are in an agency. That means you're in demand, you're offering value, and it's hard to make the time to learn, adapt. I think that's something you do very well as a leader, but it's difficult, especially for firms that may not be staffed right for growth. And then the whole growth issue is a big one. It's been a few years now of kind of constrained growth, which is a long way of saying flat for many firms, um, particularly the large holding company owned firms. And that's sort of a bellwether for the industry. I think there's lots of firms that are doing well. I'll come back to that in a minute. But, you know, all the news about the large firms showing slight declines or very limited growth, it does cast a pall over the entire industry. And I think that worries a lot of agency leaders. But I think there's great opportunity for growth. I mean, if you're a smaller firm, not one of the large behemoths, it's easier to show growth in a way, higher percentages. And, there's no rhyme or reason across sectors. Some tech firms are doing great, some tech firms are suffering a bit. To me, it feels like it's about culture in this moment and a real learning mindset. That's who's winning.
That's really thoughtful feedback. And I agree with you. It's quite uneven. It used to be, well, one sector is suffering, as you said, another would be up. I've always been at firms that were quite intentionally diversified in sectors, not jack of all trades, master of none, but really having some depth of expertise across a number of sectors. And there's certain areas that you always see doing well that command a premium, and I think that's gonna continue even into the age of AI, which shocking, we're gonna talk about AI later, what a surprise. Anyway,
Wow.
I know you had no idea that we would talk about this, but I wanna follow up on one thing, which I think is very, very important that you said, and I wanna make sure to spotlight it for our listeners, which is this is a very intensive field in terms of just people's time constraints and the kind of time we devote to our client work and to, as you get more senior, the work of the agency or the group. We're in a multi-agency group. And yet it is an industry that is always learning, always growing, always changing, and learning and evolution and personal growth, professional growth is a must. And those things are in tension sometimes. The fact that you are busy and also billable as part of our profitability model. We utilization, the language of professional services. Yet you have to also devote time outside of that billable hour to many different things, managing people, personal learning, performance evaluations, and now upskilling on AI. How do you see the tension between those two demands? Because I think you're really right in pointing that out, Kim.
Yeah, I think it's very difficult. And I do think it's an exciting opportunity to move away from 100% time and materials billing, to create a little space for our people. And I think AI is starting to create some space for people. And I hope that it's going to be applied to more learning instead of more client work. But at the same time, I think the client environment is very, very tough right now. And they're under incredible pressure, which means we're under incredible pressure. So it's a tough one, but you and I are both fans of Rashad Tabakawalo, and he talks about how you're responsible for your career and you have to devote some time, some of your personal time to learning. And I hate saying that because I know our days are long. But I think that's the situation we're in. Companies have got to make some time, our firms do, but also you've got to direct your personal time.
Yeah, it's true. And my partner, who Steve Halsey, the co-host of the podcast, he's been talking recently about that personal and professional growth piece, which is understanding it in terms of competence and relevance. That you have to be co-collaborators with your employer or your agency in ensuring that you remain competent in your job over the long term, because things will shift and evolve, and what competence is today will, and it's such an interesting word. I was really struck when you said these two words because that made a lot of sense. But what competence looks like today, no matter what your role is, are you in creative, account side, communications, digital, paid, etc.? Are you a leader of an agency and people? Are you in HR, finance? but then also relevance. How relevant will you stay to your peers and your clients and to this moment in time? I want to lay a thought process out for you, Kim, and get your reaction to it, because one thing that's bothering me a lot is what I see as a very reactive stance in the marketplace. And that includes our field, but as well as the markets in general and society. So, a report comes out. Oh my gosh, it's got a prognostication about this part of the workforce. The markets move, people freak out, people write rebuttals, and then rinse and repeat again and again. And it just feels like this desperate desire to say, do you know what's happening? Do you know what's happening? Do you have the future? And I think what I'd like to hear more of, and I'm gravitating toward people who have a perspective on this, is who has a vision that they want to put forward for what the optimal mix of human and machine should be. Humans have upside and downside, machines have upside and downside. This will evolve. It's not like I'm saying I know exactly what things should look like today, but based on how the technology is evolving, how we're using it, the skill sets we know we have within this field, why it is that Gartner might have said that we will persist and flourish. I have a vision, and I know others do too, about what that optimal mix may look like. What is your thought on that? I just feel that our industry could do so much more to be proactive and intentional with ourselves and with clients about, let's tack toward the future we believe is the optimal one.
Right. I totally agree with you, and I think it goes back to that time, the urgent taking priority. I wonder how many firms have a very clear future looking AI manifesto or strategy that they are regularly revisiting. I think that's critical. Um, it was funny. I was at AMAX North American AI Day last week. John and Burke did a great job assembling real thought leaders. And I can't remember who, but someone in as part of their talk talked about how ridiculous human in the loop is, and I hadn't really thought of it, but human in the loop, like that's sort of giving up a lot if we're just in the loop. And I think that really raises some critical questions. I think the humans in our industry bring creativity, they bring innovation, they bring relevance, they bring perspective, context, experience. We are sense makers in a way that AI isn't there yet. Hope it never will be, because I think there is the potential for us to stay ahead of AI, but use AI in powerful ways. And so I like the way you're thinking about, being proactive and putting a stake in the ground. I think we need more of that. Where do we want humans to be? Because if we're humans in the loop, I'm not sure we're going to turn out our best work for clients. I think it is human first. And it's funny because all those get defined a million different ways, but let's not forget how important humans are in our business.
That goes back to you reminding me. I love this conversation about interrogating this phrase humans in the loop, because we do use a lot of shorthand. And I think in general, like every industry has a lot of acronyms, but even AI, if you're not precise about it, we've talked about this before. What do we mean when we say AI? What do we mean when we say DEI? What do we mean when we say, ESG? These kinds of acronyms that stand in for large, 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 multi-layered, multi-implication platforms, movements, practices, we really do ourselves a disservice. So I like the idea of interrogating that. And I think it's going to take a lot of language and a lot of unpacking language to try to get more precise about what we want. My hypothesis right now for our industry is this is our year, maybe this year, next year, to really articulate to ourselves and to clients what it is the future that we're driving toward, um, who should be trusted partners, why, as we move into an age of agentic AI and more agentic workflows, where the humans are orchestrators, synthesizers, context and meaning makers. I was talking with Aaron Quitkin about this on a recent episode of the podcast. And that's going to be really, really critical. But it starts with being proactive, whether you're talking to procurement or the legal team or the IT team or clients that are collaborators on the comms or marketing space, or to your own people. We're having a town hall shortly today, and part of it I'll be trying to re-clarify our AI vision around this conversation about the vision thing and driving forward in a more productive way. But I do hope that, I feel, and I'd love to hear your point of view, I do think professional services has quite a bright future, but we're going to have to sit with, again, where it is that humans really bring that layer of value and that layer of uniqueness or specialness. I mean, how do you feel about professional services as a whole, even beyond the PR sector?
Yeah, I think there's gonna be a lot of disruption, but I think smart humans committed to learning will always add more value. I mean, we haven't even talked about the relationship piece, and relationship piece, I don't mean, remembering your clients' birthdays, but really being a trusted advisor. And that is such a strong skill in our industry and across other professional services. And that's what we have to remember. That is the core of our unique offering. And if we're pushing out AI generated work without interrogating it, we're devaluing our firms so incredibly. And that's where I think we need a lot of conversation, which you have to make room for that conversation. And, it's not just posting your AI vision or manifesto or whatever it is, but it's doing how you're doing. It's repetition, it's inviting questions, it's inviting discussion. And again, where is the time? You have to prioritize your time.
Yeah. And I think the relationship piece, you know, as we know, there's such a long tail from COVID and so many implications. Like to even say that phrase feels so much bigger than we can even wrap our hands around, our heads around in a podcast. But the shattering and fragmentation of culture, society, relationships, kind of atomizing almost of people. And I think it just persists and persists. And I love hybrid work. And I think it's really been so empowering. But that idea of being in person, but we can also see on the upside tremendous desire to be in person and tremendous energy from that, although it ebbs and flows. So I think the relationship piece is big. When you talked about trust, it reminds me of something we have talked about a lot personally, which is the ethical landscape of our work. And the ethics piece touches on so much in our society right now. It's something that's in my mind a lot. It's certainly a part of AI. It's very interesting when a lot of at the big levels of AI, the big labs, et cetera, the governmental level, there's been no real desire for regulatory infrastructure. That's really been stripped back. And then at the big AI labs, the idea of safety or alignment, aside from Anthropic, and it's been fascinating to watch this whole thing, even though they're the one racing forward fastest in some ways in terms of development, they do seem to keep that conversation going. But I guess one of my questions, this is a big one, but we have to talk about it, is what is the role and place of ethics today in the work we're doing? How do you like to talk about it? What are you hoping that people like me or people within firms are thinking about this topic?
I think it couldn't be more important, especially as AI adoption, operationalization continues. We've discussed we want to do a review of our ethics guidelines, which I think we're the first to hit the market. And I was so proud of that work that you and Mark led. But we need to keep bringing that out because I think there was a wave of interest in ethics and then everybody got busy doing the work. And I'm not sure we're reinforcing the ethics enough and the care we have to use, the bias in AI. And I think that warrants a lot more discussion and thinking and questioning than it's really getting at this moment. Do you agree? I'm concerned
I
about this.
do, and I want to see it operating on multiple levels. Like, for example, ethical decision making, having it as a lens, it's not this one time thing where like, oh, that's an ethics breach, because ethics breaches tend to happen like death by a thousand paper cuts over periods of
Mhm.
time, that leads you down a road or a mindset or a lens. But I also think that ethical decision making is an incredible that I want to see the role of the counselor in our relationships with clients. We need to bring real value and insight and outside perspective. And one of those lenses is that ethical decision making lens in a communications or marketing framework. And especially in a context where the larger society may not be as interested in it and where there's a lot of boundary pushing. I don't have to get into politics to point to 1,000 things where you're like, that does not feel good, seem good.
Right.
And we're rolling back a lot of protections, and companies are being put in the spot in ways that it really was inconceivable in other contexts. And you and I have been around long enough to see a lot of shenanigans at the business level, government level, but this right now is quite something. So I think for me, just the discussion about the fact that it's not just AI safety, it's not just what's encoded into the tools, it's also how are we looking at the larger decision making framework, especially as these tools become more and more powerful in replicating humans, deep fakes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We've always tried, you and I both been proponents, and certainly the PR Council has, of more consistent ethical training. And you said Mark McLennan, he's such an expert in the space. Just saw him in my office last week, which was awesome. But, for he and you and I, this is a constant practice. It's a constant, consistent discussion. It's not something you run once a year. So yeah, I have a lot of concerns about this space because I don't even know that a lot of folks are set up to even embrace what it means to think about ethics on a bigger level. So Kim, we're kind of coming to the end of our time here, but I wanted to get just some final sage advice from you. If you're talking to agency leaders and actually folks within all throughout our agencies, what is some advice you have for them to advance their career and their professional competence and relevance in this moment in time?
Yeah, I one of the things that's just been stuck in my head lately, and I think it's all of the conversation about value. We have to constantly ensure we're delivering value. We need to move to value-based revenue models, but to really understand the value we're delivering, I think we have to understand the numbers. So, not everybody works for publicly traded companies, but if you do, those teams need to be reading analyst reports. They need to look at earnings call transcripts, annual reports, understand the different filings and what they're signaling. And AI makes it super easy to do that and pull insights. So there's really no excuse at this point other than time. But I think there are a lot of different ways that we can understand the real business challenges of our clients and add value. And I just encourage everybody to get super smart on that. We have a session coming up at the end of April focused on the story behind the numbers. And I think that might spark some people to action. Hoping so.
I saw that and I thought that was great. The business of the business is so critical. We are looking right now at all the different metrics we provide to our teams to manage and understand client health and agency health. And Steve, again, my co-host on the podcast, had a great idea, and flies small planes, so he's a pilot. And the idea of an instrument dashboard on an airplane, he jokes like you could be focusing on altitude and then run into a mountain. You have to
Right.
look at multiple metrics, and I think that's true of looking at our clients' metrics and what is outcomes and what does value look like to their business, but also internally what are all those dials we have to turn? And they're not the same for every single client. And that's a hard thing. It's harder to work in a matrix than a simple hierarchy. It's hard to look at a dashboard of data instead of one metric. But I think you're right. That may be one of the single most important things that folks can do. And as a final thought on the client side, what's a piece of advice you would advise clients on as they seek an agency partner going forward?
We just did a little study of our CEOs and their advice for clients on value. And I think being really clear about the business objective, having agreement on that, sharing information freely, and revisiting where are our outcomes and are our outputs leading to the outcomes, or do we need to tweak? And that is the wonderful thing about PR is we now can change course, tweak at any point because we're seeing those results constantly. We're not waiting for the monthly delivery of clips as I spent my early career doing. And I do. I think it's such an exciting time to be in our business. And I hope people who are feeling a little overwhelmed can take a step back and give themselves a pep talk and really think about all the exciting ways that we can lead our clients and create business results.
Yeah, I feel that as despite it is a lot of mental load, it was just there's a lot right now to parse through, but it is an exciting time and there's a lot of opportunity to be had. And there's a lot of positive signs. I'm picking up a lot of good signals. So, Kim, I so appreciate you being on Building Brand Gravity, and I encourage anybody who watches to the end. Good job to you. Comment, share with Kim and me. We're both very accessible. You can find us, send us your thoughts and pass this along to somebody else if you think they want to hear it. And Kim, thank you. Have a great day.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the opportunity and always love talking with you.